Hello and welcome to this Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo, and hosted by Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson.
Hello, thanks for joining us on Motor Trade Radio. Today we've got our regular monthly episode looking at the performance of used car trade values. And once again, we're joined by a friend of the pod, Rupert Pontin, Head of Insight and Communication at Brego, who will take us through the key trends impacting trade values over the course of July. Brego provides retail-driven trade value pricing insight from the widest available market data in the UK. And to achieve this, it collects up to 1 million retail prices daily and uses a historical database with over 2.2 billion data points. So welcome back to the Motor Trade Radio pod, Rupert. We're really looking forward to hearing how July panned out.
Hi, Curtis. It's good to be back. It's been quite a month in some respects. There's plenty for us to go through. I guess we probably should start with what's been going on with the trade values.
Yes, most definitely.
Yeah. I think, as you say, I mean, we're past that half-year point now, aren't we? We're now into this third quarter with July and heading towards that September play. So, as you say, I mean, let's get underway, as you say there, with the headline figures for the trade values in July, what you're seeing so far as we head into sort of the final sort of week, 10 days of the month, and how they compare with last month and this time of last year.
Yeah, so the data I've got here runs from the July the 1st through to July the 20th. And looking at that period, the change in trade values overall was an increase of 0.48%, so just about 0.5%, I guess. Interesting to see the sort of the nuances in the background to that. So that's your overall figure, but there's some positives and some negatives. And I looked at it to start with by looking at what was going on with different ages of vehicles. And I think the first thing to highlight is there's been a bit more pre-reg activity, and there's been quite a jump in the volume of pre-reg cars in the market. And actually, in terms of the sort of trade price around those, there's been an increase of 0.7%. Okay, so that was one of the increases that I saw. Equally, we also saw an increase of 1.6% at 4-year-old vehicles. Now, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is probably a reflection of the period of the pandemic when there were less vehicles out in market. So there was, a drop in the volume of vehicles in market, but at the same time, an increase in the trade price for those. So I think that is sort of masking some shortage of product and a bit of demand there as well. We also saw the older vehicles have a price increase of around 3%. So that was for 11-plus-year-old vehicles. So lower end of the market, the cheap end of the market. But that's always quite a volatile sector month on month. And then on the sort of negative side, the biggest downward movement that we saw was for 7-year-old vehicles. And we saw a drop there of 1.3%. So there's some interesting facts sitting in the background there that have affected the trade as a whole.
And Rupert, before we look at specific fuel trends, can you take us through some of the trade value trends you tracked by market sector and maybe a little bit more detail on some of those trends you saw by age as well?
So we saw an increase in trade price for medium sector vehicles of 1.5%. Also, lower medium vehicles, we saw a trade price increase there of 2.7%. But the largest change in price really was on a positive side was for the Prestige Coupe Medium, where we saw the average trade price increase by 5.2%. Now, this is an interesting sector, as you guys well know, because there's quite an extensive range of vehicles that sit in that sector. and that's sort of given away by the fact the average price for the for that market sector was £43,124. So quite an expensive sector, but it's interesting that it is such a volatile piece of the market.
Yeah, definitely. And how much would that be driven by, the summer? People
Yeah, that's
actually actively looking for cars in the summer, like coupes.
I think it is. I think it's that has a part to play in it. But I also think that at this particular time of year, where we've just gone through this period of the football, that tends to give certain market sectors a boost. And
Yeah.
strangely enough, that affects the prestige coupe, medium coupe sector.
So presumably, up until we were not, England was knocked out of the World Cup, guys were
Yes,
feeling good and,
they
thinking about,
probably
yeah,
were.
maybe it's time to treat myself to a coupe.
Yeah. Well, it's a funny time, isn't it, when you've got large sporting events, and quite often there will be a period of lower sales while people are busy focusing on the event. And then, depending on the result, you can either see a really big boost or just a return back to, okay, well, let's go and buy a car. It's normal times.
Yes. And any more trends by age profile? I know you did touch on them.
Yeah, I did touch on them. Just going to flip back to my screen there. So I think the thing for me was that the excuse me, that it was the older car section where we saw probably more price stability. So anything that was sort of 8 years old and above, that area of the market by age has been pretty stable in the past few weeks. Although under some circumstances in the last couple of months, the older car section tailed off a bit. So it's nice to see it giving some more stability and see that pricing coming back.
And I mean, we were talking before we started to record, but I mean, what trends are you seeing by fuel type, and especially on EVs? And I think you've been looking at the sales data as well as to what's happening this month compared to last month and this time last year.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Philip. And I was a bit concerned, and we touched briefly on it just a second ago. But looking at whole market sales for up until the 20th of July, there's actually a decline of 2.4%. So the sales have dropped, which I think is probably attributed to two things. Firstly, as we said, the football, but also more importantly, what's been happening with the UK government and the geopolitical position. But I think particularly the UK government, with the change of Prime Minister, with Andy Burnham coming in, there's an element of what's happening here. Do we know what to expect? What way is Andy Burnham going to take the government? So I think that has probably had an impact as well. But if we look by fuel type, generally speaking, I'm just checking the data. So the percentage increase we got in trade values was around EV vehicles and hybrid vehicles. Okay, so they both increased. Trade prices both increased by 1.1%. And to quantify that a little bit further, the average trade price for an EV in July was £22,399, and for hybrids it was £18,153. So they're quite chunky when you compare them against the pricing for the petrols and the diesels. But focusing a little bit more on EVs, and actually EV sales have dropped by 5.8%. For the first part, through till July the 20th, which took me by a bit of a surprise. The average days to sale has remained pretty similar, but that's the trend there. And I can go into a little bit more detail if you'd like.
Yeah, it's obviously a key conversation at the minute, and obviously we've seen, with what's going on with the Iran conflict at the minute, and what that's doing to the pump prices. And obviously, it's one day we think it's over and it's coming down and it's going back up again. So yeah, what's been happening in the EV space?
So interestingly, looking, just going to touch on retail adverts just for EVs at this particular point. So one of the metrics I measure is what the percentage of adverts in marketplace are EVs. And I've got to say that it increased in the early part of the year. We would expect that because of the volume of EVs coming off, but it peaked in March at 8.48% of adverts were EV adverts, and then it's tailed off a little bit, and it's running for the last couple of months around 7%, slightly below, so trickling off a little bit. But it's the sales that the marker of the number of sales as a percent of whole market sales that I find really interesting. So at the beginning of the year, we were running at 6.23% of whole market sales being attributed to EVs. And then in March, that jumped, and this is where we saw that increase in fuel price, fossil fuel price, and it jumped to 8.68% in March and 9.5% in April. So I think that was the sweet spot where everybody was saying, right, the fuel is really expensive, we need to cut some costs. But what's happened since then is in May that dropped to 8%, in June that was 7.5%. And in July month to date, it's 7.3%. So I find this very interesting that we've kind of gone through this little bit of a peak. What will be fascinating to see is now that the Strait of Hormuz is now closed again, now that we've got more bombing going on by the Americans, will we see that percentage of sales start to increase again?
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? If that pressure starts to come back to the pumps again, and starts to constrain that sort of fuel price and availabilities, does that then move back into that EV demand? And I think one point that you've mentioned that we have seen obviously that softening a little bit, but we're not back to the pre-conflict demand, are we? We are at a new level of activity.
Yeah, we're at a new level of activity for sure. So let's just quantify that. Let's. I haven't looked at it in this way. I'm just shifting around the data as I speak here. If we look at the percentage of sales for June 2026, I said it was 7.5%. In June last year, it was 6.25%. So there is an upward trajectory, and that's the right thing. It's obviously got to happen. It's just a question of the speed with which it does.
Well, we'll be back after this short break with more from Rupert and the Brego market.
You're listening to a Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo.
Welcome back. Rupert, you track the Chinese OEMs very closely, and we know from the latest SMMT figures that they're pretty much driving new car sales growth at the moment, certainly across retail and fleet. But what trends stood out for you in July amongst some of the newer brands entering the used car market?
So I took quite a good look at this, actually. I mean, we do anyway on a month-by-month basis. But again, I'm going to come back to this sort of reference to the volume of sales in relation to the number and adverts in relation to the number of total sales and adverts. And if we start with the adverts, in total, the volume of the change in the number of adverts across the primary Chinese manufacturers, there was a 14.9% change, increase. Okay, so that I found really, really interesting. Now that was driven in primarily by JQ. So there were a lot more JQ vehicles that came onto the market. 62.8 increase in the number of adverts, and likewise with Leap Motor, they showed a 100% increase, but that's much lower volumes. When we look at the percentage of sales as a percent of the whole market, overall, Chinese sales for Chinese vehicles was 0.64% in June and is running at 0.84% in July. So it shows that there is quite a jump. And if we compare that against July 2025, they were 0.13% of market share. They're now 0.84%. So there's quite a big jump. I mean, it doesn't sound it, but actually in volume terms, it actually is. Which I think is fascinating. When I look more specifically at what's been going on with sales, the big changes are around that Chery group. Okay, so the JQ increase in sales was 106% from June through to July. So we're really starting to see more of that Jaku product coming onto the market. Cherry, similar type of situation, but obviously they didn't come to the market until late last year, so less used cars in the market, but a 58.6% increase. But the biggest mover was Leapmotor. I'll caveat in a second, but Leapmotor saw a 111.4% increase in sales. Now, that is quite low. We're talking about 35 cars sold in June and 74 sold in July. Whereas if you compare that with the guys at the top of the table, I guess, that would be BYD, which which increased by 5.5% month on month. But you're talking about selling 932 cars in the month.
And that's important context, isn't it? And it really does show. I mean, BYD have got a solid volume there, and Jaco are certainly closing in, aren't they? From what you're saying.
Yeah, I think they are, and when you look at the Cherry Group, if you looked at the Cherry Group as a Cherry, Omoda, and Jaco all together, we know that in the new car marketplace they have something just over 6% of sales as a group, which is enough to put them in second place overall. But because of the real surge from the Jaco brand, the Omoda, the Cherry, their big push into the marketplace, they're going to catch BYD pretty quickly. I need to caveat one thing here. I did not include MG in this. I've used the newer Chinese manufacturers, and in percentage terms, I will reference Skywell, because they showed a 3,400% increase, although that was from one sale in June to 35 in July. And of course, as we all know, the importer is no longer bringing those vehicles into the country. But yeah, that was my standout whop.
Yeah, so a relatively good month for used cars for Skywell.
Well, I
against
understand
backdrop
that all the I understand all the Skywell stock has gone to one particular retailer for them to feed it to the market, and that retailer is putting those cars in at extraordinarily competitive pricing, I think is the best way to put it.
That's a very political way of putting it, yeah.
And Rupert, staying with some of those brands, what's your longer term view on how trade values will perform for the likes of BYD, Jaco, and Omoda, who are all currently doing particularly well in the used car sector?
Yeah. So I did a brief look through the forecast data for those brands. And actually, we are forecasting that in 3 years' time, they will have a better residual value percentage of original cost new than they currently do at the moment. And I think that the view it's not my personal view, because this is all driven by the data in the system, but the emphasis is on the fact that more people will be used to the Chinese brand. They'll have more brands. They'll have more confidence in them, and actually their residual values will strengthen going further forward. From a personal point of view, I agree with it. Some of these brands are really worrying the legacy manufacturers, and rightly so, because of the quality of the product, because of the pricing, and because of their sales approach to pushing new and used cars into the UK marketplace.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll keep revisiting that as we go through time. And I mean, Curtis, on the outset of the introduction, you talked about that 1 million retail prices that you monitor every day, and looking at that database of over 2.2 billion data points. I mean, let's look at the monthly analysis you look at from a retail advert perspective in terms of volumes and what those trends are telling us in July, and again, how that market's shifting. I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, looking at the EVs in particular, but what are the general trends you're now starting to see around those retail advert volumes in the market?
Sure. Well, if you compare the June period against the July period, it's been pretty stable, to be honest, at a high level. So a drop of 0.1% in the number of adverts in market. But as ever, there is some context to be drilled down into here. So if we were looking at the pre-reg market, there's been a 21.7% increase. Now that is kind of not a surprise, because I think that we're looking at vehicles that have been pre-registered, and I think that there was a lot of activity towards the end of H1 to make sure that they made their bonuses, and therefore I would have expected to see that increase in pre-reg vehicles in July, because of course that's when they hit the market. In other terms, in other trends, 1-year-old vehicles, we saw a drop of 6.5%, or actually 6.6% in the number of adverts in the market, which is interesting. Now, I could do with some more time really to delve into exactly why that happened. But the other age group, and this is harking back to something I said in terms of pricing and desirability earlier. And that is the 4-year-old market. So there was a 4.72% decrease in the number of adverts in market. Now, tie that in with the increase in the trade price on those vehicles, and you can see that there's some demand there and some shortage of stock.
Yeah, direct consequence of that supply and demand in that pandemic period of production, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And again, we talked about what was happening with the older vehicles in terms of the increasing in the stability and the increasing in the trade prices. Well, there are a few more of those vehicles in the marketplace, and that sort of ranges from 7 years up to 10-year-old vehicles, where the increase is between 0.2% and 1.2%. So more of those adverts in marketplace, but I think that's because there's more stock there, and there is demand there because we saw the trade prices were shifting upwards.
And Rupert, as part of your monthly analysis, you also look at some of the fastest sellers. So who were July's winners across the various sectors?
Sure. Well, what I've done is I've looked at all cars, and so for July, the best-selling car in that period, 1st July to 20th of July, was the BMW 330e M Sport Saloon. And that had an average days to sale of 11.7. Okay, so just to let you know that this is based on having a minimum of 30 sales. Otherwise, you can get some really, really quick twists around there. But so it was the BMW 330 Saloon in first place, Nissan Qashqai 1.6 N-Tech Plus in second place at 12 days. And in third place was the BMW 116 Sport 5-door, and that was at 12.2 days to sale. So pretty rapid sales for those particular vehicles. And I was interested to see that there's some pretty good demand for that 330e Saloon. It is a good car.
Yeah, no, they're pretty impressive, aren't they? And anything specifically in terms of faster sellers by fuel type?
I've not done that bit. I've got another couple of gems for you, though. EVs. Yep. So looking specifically at EV, and I was a little bit surprised by this. The fastest seller was the Audi Q4 e-tron S-Line, and that sold on average in 8.6 days. Second place was the MG4 SE, and that sold in 11.7 days. And in third place was the Polestar 2 at 14.3 days. So I was quite surprised to see the Q4 e-tron at the top of the charts. Although thinking back, when I was doing the monthly report for June, they featured quite heavily as fastest sellers there as well. So that was interesting. And finally, just on the Chinese cars, just wanted to highlight that the winners in the Chinese car sector, and I have included MG this time around, with the MG HS 15T FEV Trophy, and that car was selling it was sold on an average of 4.3 days, followed by the MG4, which was 11.7 days. That appeared in an earlier list, and the Cherry Tiggo 8 in third place at 14.7 days.
I mean, I think that's the first time that car's made an appearance on the podcast.
I think it is, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
There's a couple of surprises in them updates, though, Rupert.
Yeah. So the other thing, just to add, because we were talking about JQ, and because JQ is very high on people's list, JQ had an average days to sale of 16.1 days. And they sold 158 vehicles. Okay. Now, in comparison to the other three that I mentioned, that's almost treble. So the MG4 had 96, but it's still significantly more than anybody else.
Interesting that, because I think we Curtis and I caught up with Steve Young last week, who obviously runs the Auto West London site, JQ.
Yeah.
And he was talking about a 2-month lead time on some of that JQ product, and that the team keeps selling his demonstrators very quickly because there's just not enough used in the market, and they serve as a good alternative to those people that don't want to wait 2 months for a new one.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. There is quite a bit of pent-up demand for the JQ product, isn't there?
And I mean, again, great conversation as always, and conscious that that's up to the 20th of July that we've been looking at the data on. But I think clearly in that first 20 days of July, there's certainly some interesting dynamics, particularly around that EV marketplace and the changes in terms of sales volume, and as you highlighted there, that age profile, that 4-year-old stock now as a consequence of the pandemic. I mean, for those listeners that want to get involved with Brego, have a chat with you about some of the data and insight that you're sharing and looking at on a continual basis, how can the listeners get hold of you?
Well, the best way is just to drop me a line on LinkedIn, or use my phone number, which is on LinkedIn, or drop me an email. Just reach out, and I can have a chat at a high level. And if the guys want to take it further, have a look at the platform in action, then I'll hand you over to one of the guys in the commercial team, and they can help you through.
Well, that's all for now. So many thanks, Rupert, for joining us. We'll catch up again this time next month to see how August performed. Many thanks to you for listening. We hope you found this trade values insight useful. Philip and I are back with the big car retailing headlines this weekend. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to this Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo.